All right, so these are our Darwin notes. So if you haven't already, go ahead and go to Classroom, and you want to go ahead and click on classwork. And it's going to be in our Unit 6 Evolution. And you're going to scroll down till you see Darwin Notes, okay? It's going to be here, and here's your copy. So make sure you click View Assignment and open up your copy to do your Cornell notes. And make sure that you add highlights and a summary before submitting, and then create a link on page 62 of your notebook to your completed notes. All right, so let's go ahead and get started, okay? All right, so Darwin is pretty much someone you might have heard about, and he is pretty much the father of what we would consider natural selection. So what does the father mean? It means that he kind of gave us the first thoughts on natural selection, okay? And he did it at the Galapagos Islands, and we'll talk a lot more about his discoveries there as well. Okay, and so our central question for our notes is, what is natural selection? How does it affect a population? And a population here is what we're talking about. A population would be a group of the same species. So a population of humans, a population of finches, which is a type of bird, a population of cows, a population of cats. They all have to be of the same species. All right, so our learning goals as we go through here, the first thing is to define evolution and natural selection. Describe the 4 steps of natural selection, giving an example of each we'll look at. Explain the importance of variation, which we've talked about with the sticklebacks. And does natural selection act on an organism's phenotype? Remember, that's their physical characteristic, or genotype, that's in their DNA and genes, and be able to explain. All right. All right, theory of evolution. We've talked about the sticklebacks, and we've talked about how the fossils and everything we've looked at is kind of the evidence of that evolution of the sticklebacks. It is the process of change over time. And specifically, it's a change in the frequency of a gene or allele in a population over time. Remember, we talked about how those spines, that gene actually decreased in frequency over time with the sticklebacks, and that's what we saw happening with the fossils. Okay. Charles Darwin was called the father of evolution. He proposed a mechanism, or a thought process for evolution, which is natural selection. He went on an actual 5-year trip around the world on the ship. It's called the HMS Beagle. It's a good trivia Jeopardy question. As the ship's naturalist, he made observations of organisms in South America and the Galapagos Islands. And he actually wrote a book about it, of the origin of the species. Okay. And so the Galapagos are right here. They're on the edge of South America, just outside. Right here, you can see the bend of down from Mexico area into South America, the little bend here. And so it's right off this tip here of South America is the Galapagos Islands. Okay. And one of the things that he's famous for, and we'll actually work with it here in class, is his finches. So he saw that there was a finch, which is a species of bird, but how they all were different, and how they actually developed different beaks and evolved different beaks, and why they did. And we'll talk more about this as we actually look into his discoveries here in class. Okay. And so natural selection is defined as organisms that are best adapted to an environment, survive and reproduce more than others. So you saw that with the sticklebacks. Remember when we talked about those spines? We saw the spines decrease in frequency of that gene. And so what happens is they didn't survive. They didn't reproduce. They didn't have children because there was this natural selection against it. They didn't need them anymore to be not eaten by the big mouth fish in one of the lakes for sure, okay? And so Darwin's theory of evolution occurs in actually 4 different steps. The first step is what we call overproduction. The second step is variation. And the third step is competition. And our 4th step is what we call selection. And we'll go through each one of these. All right, so let's look at what is overproduction. So overproduction is each species produces more offspring than can survive. This doesn't usually happen in humans anymore, but it happens everywhere else. So here is mice, so you can see how many are there. There's lots of them. Some of them may not survive. So it's producing as many as they can to pass on their genes. And here's a picture of fish eggs. Look how many they lay, but not all of those are going to hatch and survive into adulthood to reproduce. So that's where we're looking. It's not just that they survive, they're born, they're there, but they have to reproduce and pass on their genes, okay? And so another option, the next thing we look at is variation. And that is each individual has a unique combination of inherited traits. That's why you do not look like your parents. We've talked about that in crossing over in meiosis. And then adaptation, which we've talked a lot about with the sticklebacks, is an inherited trait that increases an organism's chances of survival. And when we're talking about survival, we're talking about not only is it alive, but it's able to reproduce. It's able to have progeny. It's able to pass on those genes. And so you can see these are ladybugs. And so different ones with different colors might survive better in different areas. Okay, like this one. What adaptations do you see here with this white fox? What is an adaptation? This fox, usually the ones we see around here are brown, but this one is white, right? So I'll give you a minute to think about that. Hopefully, maybe you see that this fox has actually caused this fox to have more of a white color. It lives in the snow. So now this is our fox that will live. So the brown fox actually probably has died off, has not been able to make it to reproduce. And so that's why the genes of the white fox actually are higher in this environment. Okay. How about here? What adaptations do you see here? What did this porcupine do? So if you didn't see the porcupine, he's right here. But you can see that not only does he have the adaptations of being the color of the leaves and being camouflaged, but he's also very pokey. Nobody wants to eat a pokey porcupine, okay? And so why is variation important? Well, it's because the environment changes. Remember when we talked about how that lake disappeared? The environment completely changed. And so the sticklebacks changed as they evolved over the thousands and thousands of years while that lake was there. And so the more variation within a species, so the more different genes they can choose from, the more likely it will survive. If it doesn't have a lot of variation or change, then what's going to happen is they're vulnerable and they die. Just like when we watch the superbugs, right? They had to have that variation or that gene present in their DNA to be able for it to come out as they went higher and higher into the antibiotics to become more resistant. So the more variation of types of species in a habitat, the more likely at least some will survive. And dinosaurs were replaced by mammals. So dinosaurs actually, when the meteor came down and hit, those dinosaurs didn't survive because they didn't have enough variation or that the variation they needed in their genes to survive that environment, okay? And then you can look here. This is an example of variation. These are shells. So you can see these shells, the ones that have lived, would be in different environments. So some of these might be, maybe the dark ones are more in sandy environments, and these, I'm not sure, would be in more plant or coral environments, so that they can be hidden. Because if they're not hidden, then they get eaten, and they cannot reproduce and pass on their genes, okay? Third step of natural selection that you'll see happening is individuals compete for limited resources. So food, water, space, mates. Natural selection occurs through what we call survival of the fittest. And fitness is the ability to survive and reproduce. Fitness is not just the ability to survive. You need to reproduce. That is a definition of fitness. If you can't reproduce, then you are not have the most fitness of the genes, okay? And not all individuals survived adulthood. You've got diseases, you've got predators, and so forth, just like that white fox. Well, most likely all the brown foxes didn't survive to adulthood because they were eaten by predators, okay? And so the white fox gene is the one that survived and got passed on, okay? And then the fourth step in this is selection. So this is when the individuals with the best traits or adaptations will survive and have the opportunity to pass on its traits to the offspring or the progeny. And natural selection acts on the phenotype. Notice I'm talking about what the animal looks like. White dog, pokey porcupine, camouflage through the leaves. I'm not looking at the DNA. I'm actually looking at their phenotype. And so natural selection acts on the phenotype, not the genotype. For example, when a predator finds its prey, it is due to the prey's physical characteristics like color or slow speed, not the genotype. So the predator does go, you're a homozygous recessive. I think I'll eat you. No, it's based on what color or what the animal looks like, okay? And individuals with traits that are not well suited to their environment will die or leave few offspring. So if it's not something that shows up a lot, that helps them survive and reproduce, then that gene frequency will decrease, just like we saw with the stickleback. And evolution occurs when good traits build up in a population over many generations and bad traits are eliminated by the death of the individuals. And what we mean by good and bad is that good helps them survive depending on how that environment happens. And we'll see this when we talk about the rock pocket mouse, how those gene frequencies have to change to be able to get them to survive and reproduce, okay? So one of the things I can give an example here is the peppered moth. So which moth do you think the bird is going to catch? So let's look at A. So which one on this one do you think the bird is going to eat? Hopefully you see two of them. There's two of them on there. Hopefully you said this black one right here, right? That's super easy to see. And so of course the bird would eat this moth and not this one. He's right here. And so this is the gene that would survive, reproduce, and you would see this moth have a higher fitness. So that means you would see more moths that start looking speckled than black. Okay. How about this one? So which moth do you think the bird's going to catch here? And hopefully on this one, you said this white one. So it's the same moth, but notice if the trees look like this, white, then white's going to survive. But if the trees are bark is like this, then the black one's going to survive and the white one's not going to survive and reproduce because this little guy here, this bird's going to eat him. Easier to see. All right, so that is our notes on Darwin. Go ahead, go back and highlight any important notes, make connections to your notes on the left-hand column. Write any questions you may have in the left-hand column and use your highlights, connections, and questions for your summary. And then make sure you're writing a 3 to 5 sentence summary. And that's it. And if you guys have any questions, please let me know. See you next time.